We spend far too much time worried about what makes us different than the next person or better than the next person, and not enough time thinking about why we should respect the next person. We all have a story, an overarching theme that runs through our lives and makes us who we are. The problem is, we think that since each of our stories is different, there's not a lot of perceived value and shared struggle. But we have far more in common than we can imagine, and what motivates one person can certainly help us as well. The Third Lap podcast is about understanding, respecting, and appreciating the struggle that it takes to overcome immeasurable odds in order to reach your destiny. Join me as I interview and bond with some of the most inspiring and incredible people, diving into their why to get a full understanding of their being. Without each other, we have nothing. So let's go on this adventure together and take on the future with open minds and open hearts. Welcome to the Third Lap podcast. What's going on, everybody? Welcome again to another episode of the Third Lap podcast. This week, I am joined by the homie, Sam Dolciné. I'm really excited today to be able to talk to him. It's been a long time, man. I've known this brother for a minute, and I'm really, just hyped up to dig into his story today and really get a chance to share his message with the rest of you all. Sam is the founder of the Black Real Estate Dialogue, is also an educator and a real estate investor. Sam, what's going on, brother? How's everything?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I've been looking forward to this for a while, so I'm excited to dig into our conversation and hopefully share some helpful information, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how Sam and I know each other, I met Sam when I first started at Uncommon Schools. That was like 4 or 5 years ago. I was thinking about it today, like running the timeline back. So I was at Uncommon, I think 3 weeks, and then Sam bounced on me.
Yeah.
Cool. Like I was so looking forward to working with another brother in the work. And then Sam was like, yo, I'm out to Cali. I'm out of here. But we stayed cool, even though he relocated to the West Coast. And I've always just cheered Sam on, really a big advocate of him and his podcast. Just excited to see him take flight with the things that he really cares about. And, as intelligent of a brother as you are, it was a matter of time before you got right. So, yeah, man, Sam, anything you want to add about how we know each other?
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember it was like summer of 2016. Remember you and a couple other folks had just started. We did some training. We talked with each other a little bit. And then before you know it, it was my last day. So I think I left there in like August of 16. I moved over here August 22nd. So yeah, man, I'm glad we still remain in contact from that point, just like supporting each other through like the different career things we've done and stuff like that. So it's been cool. It's been cool to still keep in touch, man. And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's definitely been worth staying in touch. Again, we check in with each other just to make sure things are going well. And so, Sam, this is the Rep Your Hood section, man. What hood you repping?
Yeah, so I'm from Brooklyn, New York originally. So I
Brooklyn.
That's a fact, man. So started for like my first probably 7 years living in the Flatbush area. And then we moved to an area called Old Mill Basin, which is near Canarsie. So it's right near Canarsie. Most people are familiar with Canarsie. So right over there where I grew up most of my life. So yeah, I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. That's always going to be home, even if I probably never move back. So yeah, Brooklyn.
Yeah, man. Shouts out to Brooklyn. Shouts out to Simone Mouchette, who's also repping from Brooklyn. I'm sure I have a couple more Brooklyn heads coming down the pipeline. I actually spent a lot of time in Brooklyn. My cousin lived out there in Malcolm X and Bainbridge. So spent a ton of time in like my mid-teens, early 20s running through Brooklyn. It's nothing like Brooklyn, man. Actually, I tell people Philadelphia is a lot like Brooklyn. When folks from New York are trying to figure out if they should move to New York, they're like, well, if you like Brooklyn, or move to Philly, if you like Brooklyn, you'll rock with Philly, man. But Brooklyn is dope, bro, clearly. And so any other places that you've lived that have potentially been impactful on your life and your career?
Yeah, so I went to Fredonia State University, which is in Western New York, about an hour south of Buffalo. So I was there for a better part of 4 years. I've been in LA for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years this August. Yeah, those are pretty much all the places I've lived. So Brooklyn, Fredonia, and LA.
Yeah, me and the wife going to be in LA in the summer. So I'm going to definitely hit you. We're going to be fully vaccinated, so we safe, you know what I mean? So I'm going to definitely hit you when we're on the West Coast. We want to hit up Los Angeles and Oakland just to see some sights and stuff. But yeah, Los Angeles, I've heard nothing but good things about too. And I'm glad that you were able to, find your pathway in LA. And when you moved dolo, right? Like it was just you.
It was pretty much just me. I knew 4 people
Okay.
who I went to school with who ended up out here for different reasons. 2
Nice.
who I'm still in contact with, 1 who moved back, 1 who, we haven't spoken in a long time. So more or less by myself, pretty much. Yeah, it's crazy. I was like reflecting recently on like what that was like, because that's like the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. But I just felt, I don't know, I just felt compelled. I felt like this is where I'm supposed to be, just how everything worked out. Yeah, it was like a shot in the dark, but it proved to be life-changing, man. So yeah, I moved out here. I packed 2 suitcases. I got on the plane. Um, I shipped my car. Put a bunch of stuff in my car, and I started fresh.
There it is, brother. I love it, right? Those leaps of faith, you never know where they can land you.
Yeah.
And that leap of faith definitely puts you in the right place, in the right state of mind to pursue the endeavors that you're on currently. And so, yeah, man, at this point, we can just kind of jump into your story. The platform is yours. And so to really begin here, let's start off, wherever you want to originate your story. Like I said before, before we got on, people started kind of anywhere. So that's up to you. But we'd love to hear, where your pathway started for you, at least where you feel it did.
Yeah. So pathway, I guess, to where I'm at now.
Yeah, to your career. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely, to becoming a real estate investor, but I know that like there were other mile markers and things that happened along that pathway. But where do you feel like it started?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing that popped in my mind was just after college. So after college, it was tough. It was tough. Thankfully, I was blessed enough that I had a home to come back to. Not a lot of people can say that. I literally came right back to my room I grew up in, which is a blessing. That's not the story for most people. So I was thankful for that I at least had that. But I was just struggling to find my way. I assumed, and I struggled a lot throughout college academically, and I just assumed like I would get this great $50,000 job, and that's what life was supposed to be like. You get a degree, you're supposed to get a certain job. That's what I thought at that time. And so it was rough. It was rough, man. Did different jobs. I worked at Sprint for a couple of weeks, and then I worked as a bank teller at Citibank, and then I got the opportunity at Uncommon Schools, which kind of changed the game for me. So there, I learned a lot, met a lot of great people, and I always wanted to do recruiting. It was just a matter of me getting the opportunity. So did that for a couple of years, and then came out to LA to work for another charter school. So I was at that charter school for like 2 years, moved to another charter school for about 2 years, and then where I'm at now. So career wise, I always knew that I wanted to get into recruiting. But another turning point for me was a couple of years ago, I decided to just look at my retirement account, and they have these calculators that basically can show you, all right, assuming you get like 3% raises for the rest of your life and contribute this much, this is how much you'll have from this specific source, the retirement plan. And it also lets you say, all right, cool, this is what I want to withdraw each year. This is what I want to withdraw each year from my lifestyle, whatever. And what I realized was like, yo, this is not going to last me that long. I got to figure out something else to do. I got to figure out something. So I'm like, you know what? I need to figure out how to invest in real estate. And so, I just kind of dug into everything for like a year. And I was like, all right, I got to do this. So I invested in my first property in 2019. And I also started a podcast as well, because I was looking for a podcast with Black real estate investors who I could relate to. I couldn't find it. I'm sure this and that existed, but I couldn't find it. So at that same time, I invested in the property. I closed the same week that my podcast started, which was not intentional, but life has changed tremendously since then. So I think everything I experienced led up to that point, which is kind of propelling me forward and is really the core of what I'm doing now.
Yeah, so I would love to hear about that initial investment into the property. Like you mentioned, you were going looking for information, and it's easy to just drown in information, right? Like there's so much out here. And it's funny because what I see a lot of times are people just like, go, just do it. You just got to do it. Like, stop looking and just do it. And like, yeah, there is a certain element of just do it, but just doing it could also just lose you a lot of money. And so, how did you figure out what your initial investment was. Where was the investment? Was it in LA? Was it out of state? Because I know you do a lot of talk about like out of state managing and out of state investments. So yeah, we'd love to just hear how you identified that first property, and then ultimately, how have you continued this momentum?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so I live in LA and my property is in Ohio. And the reason for that is what I realized is that if I wanted to buy a property that I did not plan to occupy, because if you do plan to occupy, there's like different down payment assistance, there's different ways around it in an expensive market. I didn't know about any of those at that time. And so, I don't even think I would be able to qualify at that time either. And so I was doing research just in the black hole of just stuff, trying to read everything about real estate. And I'm like, wait, I discovered something called out of state investing, which I'd never heard of. The way I saw it, it's like you live by every property you have. I just didn't even know you could do that. And so I started to dive a little bit deeper into that information. And then I'm like, all right, I think this is something I want to do. It seems more affordable compared to the prices I'm seeing out here. And so I got connected to these folks in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. And basically it was a company that basically flips properties to investors. And so I got connected with them. I went out there for a market tour. And a home came on the market. Nothing was available when I went there, but a home came on the market when maybe like a month after. It met my criteria. I got it inspected, all that stuff. And then thankfully I was able to close on the property. And so being somebody who's not from a lucrative career, I had to be creative. So the two things I did was, before I even knew what I was going to do, I put my student loans in forbearance, and I was paying a lot of money. So I put my student loans in forbearance, which means, for those who are not familiar, which means that I paused the payments for a year and I literally just saved all that money. I put it into account. And I was like, all right, this is not going to be that much money. Like, what else can I do? So I called my retirement plan. I said, hey, what are my options to use some of this money? They said, you could take it all out and pay this huge tax bill, or you can borrow up to 50% and pay yourself back with interest over a period of time. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do that. And that gave me enough money for the down payment. And, the rest is history. Thankfully I was able to close on that. And I've had it for, I guess, almost 2 years now. It'll be 2 years this fall. It hasn't been a perfect journey, but, I'm glad I did it. And, I'm hopeful to do some more in the future.
And so I'm sure when people hear like out of state investment, like their heart starts to jump. My family, we have a property in Georgia that none of us live on. And like managing that out of state has been a headache. Keeping up with tenants and keeping a property up to snuff hasn't been easy. And so I would love to hear from you, especially because part of your podcast and what I see pretty consistently from you on Instagram is around like, yo, like there are spots in this country that like y'all need to be in on, like, let's get it popping. And so, would love to hear from you. How do you approach it knowing that you have to manage out of state properties? When you got that first property in Dayton, what were the first couple steps that you took to ensure that like, okay, this property will be something that can be maintained?
Yeah. So I think first it was about finding a team. It's about getting a team on the ground. What I had to realize is that, I had to disconnect myself emotionally from it. And what I mean by that is like something goes wrong, there's nothing I can do about it. Like as investing long distance, you got to learn how to get things done through other people. So it's a matter of getting a good team on the ground. If you use property management, getting a good property manager, getting somebody good to get you deals, whether that's a wholesaler, whether that's a realtor or whoever, somebody you trust. If you want to get into the rehab, contractors who are good or handyman. So it's really about getting a good team on the ground and networking as well. I had a repair that needed to be done. Since I'm self-managing now, the tenant's heat went out. So what I did was I texted a woman who I know, who invests out there, who I met online. She gave me a connection to the heating company. They came the next day, they fixed the lady's heat. So it's really about getting things done through other people. Not everybody has that temperament. But I mean, think about it, right? Let's think about Chase or something, right? Let's just the first thing that came to my mind. They have offices globally. You think the CEO has been to all those offices? Like think about businesses that own property all over the place. You think the CEO knows or even has been to all those places? Like, think about it. All these hotel chains all over the country. You can't keep an eye on them at every time. So the point is getting things done through other people, vetting the people properly, following through, making sure stuff is getting done. So that's what I would say. It hasn't been easy, but I just had to get to a point where I like disconnected from the fact that I can't do it every day. Because even if I own property where I live at, why would I drive past there every day? Why would I visit there every week? Like, that's what kind of quality of life is that? You got to set up systems in place. You got to vet tenants properly. And, once you have the systems in place, you can get things done through other people. And that's like, whether it's local or whether it's somewhere else, like, it shouldn't be something that you obsess over.
You're listening to the Third Lap Podcast with Mal Davis.
Yeah, I love that analogy about the CEO of Chase, right? It's like you said, he doesn't go to every office, but they know that they have the systems in place to make it sustainable. So his job is to just drive the ship forward. He can't be checking on every loose creaking board. Like, that's not his role. And so, yeah, man, I really appreciate that. And Sam, so you invested in your first property, you said in 2019, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, what were the next steps? Did you identify like more properties that you wanted to get invested in? And also talk to us about the podcast, because the podcast, I mean, has taken off, my brother. Just on Instagram, you're up to almost 59,000 followers. On YouTube, I mean, you live on YouTube too. Like, you popping all over the place, man. And so, you're clearly in the right lane. You clearly identified like a niche in a market that needed to be addressed, specifically from like Black real estate investors. And so, yeah, man, talk to us about that journey. How have you been progressing since that first property, and how have you decided what direction you wanted to take the podcast in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So after that first property, I was really trying to figure out what's next, like what I want to do next. And I've like bounced around a bunch of different ideas, like whether I wanted to partner or whatever the case was. So, that's what I was trying to figure out. And as far as real estate, the next thing I want to do is get a property here in LA through the FHA loan program, which allows you to put down 3.5%. So my plan is to get a property using that program here in LA, live in one unit, rent the others out, whether it's like a duplex, triplex, that's my goal. It's my next goal, real estate wise. So I'm tracking towards that, and hopefully that can happen this year. And as far as the podcast, yeah, I mean, I started the podcast and I'm like, initially, all right, maybe my friends will check it out. But it just kind of blew up, especially during the pandemic. The pandemic really took things to the next level because there was a much more engaged audience. People were home, like there was nothing to do. And so in the midst of all the chaos and the sadness of that, the podcast platform and the brand experienced a lot of success, and people were really receptive to the information. And so that, last year was just incredible. And things are still going pretty good. We're growing and adding more things. So the podcast has been great. And me, intentionally, initially, I just thought, I just want to provide this information to people. I didn't think it would turn into a business. I didn't go into it thinking that. I didn't know you could do that. But, thankfully, a lot of doors have opened for that, which I appreciate. It's been great just to serve people and help people out. But it's definitely a big sacrifice. But ultimately, the purpose of it and my purpose in it is to help people and empower people with the information. Just so that it's possible. Most of us don't come from families who own anything. Maybe grandma got a house, but my parents don't own a house. My parents have been renting the majority of my life. So that's the story for most of us. But the podcast is there to show that it's possible, even if you only buy one house. That could change your family's life forever. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I love that as the mission of the podcast. I feel like that is the purpose of mine too, is to just show us possible. I'll try to highlight and bring on as many different and diverse people as I can, just because you never know who's listening. I mean, real estate is something that has been around for the longest time. I was talking to my dad actually about the 80s, because he was talking about how much money he was getting in the 80s. And I'm like, man, they was getting right in the 80s. And, when you look at the real estate bubble and everything popped and all of these different shifts and changes that have happened. But, when I was reflecting on, man, they getting money in the 80s, I literally thought about you and a couple other people. I'm like, nah, people really getting money in 2021 too. Like, it's still going on. You just have to be plugged into the right channels. And so, I love the fact that you're really aspiring to help people understand that this is possible and something worth pursuing, which, I have thought about this for a really long time. But as far as like stocks and real estate, I kind of had a coming to God, Jesus moment the same way you did, thinking about retirement. And I'm like, nah, bro, I'm not going to be working until I'm 70 to barely retire. And then when I am retired, living check to check, scraping pennies together, when I have all of this time in my prime to really take advantage of opportunities. And so, Sam, I appreciate you because you're always somebody that's forward thinking, but never to leave folks behind, but to open doors and leave them open so that people can follow behind you, man. And that's what it is. That's what being a trailblazer is all about, yo. And so excited again to just keep seeing your journey and keep seeing you move forward. But I do want to highlight something. So you mentioned numerous times that this has not been easy, right? You haven't alluded to like what has been difficult, but you've said being an investor hasn't been easy. Starting this process hasn't been easy. Managing out of state hasn't been easy. This wouldn't be the Third Lap podcast if we didn't dig into some of the difficulties, right? Like we don't want to highlight just those. We want to talk triumph. We want to talk, the winning season too. But, our losses and our difficulties and adversity is what really shapes us and molds us to become the champions that we are in the end of the day. So I would love to just hear from you. What are some of the challenges that you've had to face either in your talent work before you moved to Trek, still in talent now with Trek, but, the real estate, the podcast, really anything you want to talk about? Well, what are some of the difficulties, the trials and tribulations that you've had to face individually?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with like the career and then I'll go to like the real estate and podcast. So I was working in education for almost 7 years in the education space, recruiting. And I tried to get out, I tried to get out many times. And the challenge that I was running into is that in my mind, I thought of it very simply. Recruiting is the same. It's the same skill set. You're just learning a new product. It's like a salesperson going from selling shoes to selling bikes or to selling clothes. It's the same skill set. You just got to learn the product. And that's how I always thought of it. But I never ran into a company who agreed with that. So Trek, they took a chance on me. They appreciated my background. They appreciated the difference and they value my experience. So that was a challenge there. But it's just a matter of timing, thank God it worked out like it did. It always does. But it was just a matter of time and just, it makes me appreciate it because it took a long time to find the right switch. And then prior to that, my salary was cut by 25%. Not a lot of people know that, but it was cut by 25% because the school I was working at was going through budget issues. And they just determined that I would be the person whose salary will be cut. I don't think anybody else on the staff received that same hour and salary cut. Not only that, by the end of the school year, my job was set to be eliminated due to a merger that was happening. They merged with another network. So, it hasn't all been easy. And in the midst of all that, I'm still like putting the podcast out. I'm still creating product. I'm still doing all those things. But it hasn't always been easy. So as far as the career, that would be it. And I think something else I think about too is I tried to go to business school a few years ago. I tried to enroll I would have graduated had I gone in last May. And, there was a period of time when I thought that if I don't have a master's degree or if I don't have an MBA, like I'm not going to be nothing. Like I'm not going to be able to do anything. I'm not going to be able to lead a team or whatever the case. And that didn't work out. And the reason it didn't work out is because on paper, I didn't measure up. So my GPA and my test scores, took the test like 6 times. I didn't get past like a 540, which is, you're not getting in nowhere with that. So, that's what that was that. Like I still have the sign, the rejections on my wall. And then above it, I have God's plan, and after that moment, like I was going to go again. I'm like, you know what? This is not for me. This is not my lane. This is not what God has for me, and that's okay. There's more ways to make it in this world. I don't have to necessarily fit into a box or go up a corporate ladder. Like maybe I can create my own ladder and then bring up other people. So career-wise, those are some of the challenges, but ultimately everything happened for a reason. Everything was part of a greater plan.
Yeah, man, for sure. And we definitely had those conversations about you trying to get out of the charter. It was like every year he was like, yo, son,
Yeah,
I'm done.
yeah,
Nah, man, didn't know about the money being cut. I think we talked a little bit about the hours though at one point. And so it made sense that like you continue to kind of keep your eyes open. And yeah, I could relate to the talent work that we do in education, not correlating outside of this work to like for profit specifically. And I'll challenge any HR or for-profit hiring managers that listen to this, open up your mind, because education, like recruitment, might be the hardest, other than maybe some like IT work, or being very specific. I dare somebody to come into this work and go find a middle school special education teacher right now, right? Show me how it's done. Because if y'all swear that what you're doing is so hard and what we do is so easy, come find a middle school special ed teacher and show me the process. Like you said, it's just understanding the product, but it all correlates. And so I'm glad that you were able to get the trek and really find a new pathway, find something else that's going to challenge you. But you still have the podcast, you still have your investments. And so you mentioned your goal this year is to be able to use FHA to purchase a property out in Los Angeles, to be able to like start the property ownership there. And so what other plans do you have for yourself? It could be for 2021 or just moving forward, but like, where do you plan to take this? Where do you want to go next?
yeah. So I think for the podcast, um, I want to do more partnerships. I want to get some brand partnerships, and I guess I'll talk about some challenges with that too. Um, so it's hard being consistent, which I'm sure you've experienced. Like it's hard. Like showing up every week is hard. Finding people is hard. Showing up and continuing to put stuff out, wondering whether or not people are going to listen to it is hard. Before you really start gaining traction, it is very difficult. But what I would say to anybody who has a podcast or wants to start a podcast, you got to keep going. You got to keep going, because you may be one connection away, one episode away, one just run away from taking things to another level. I didn't know that that during the pandemic, I would, things would get so much better. Or I didn't know the last quarter last year was going to be so great. I didn't know that, but the thing is, I kept going. I believed that there was a purpose. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So regardless of what it looks like, regardless of the obstacles and just stress and fatigue, and just wondering if this is even worth it, I kept going. So I would encourage anybody else with a podcast just to keep going. But yeah, we're looking to do hopefully some brand partnerships and sponsorships this year. That's definitely something I want to do. Maybe put out more products, continue to grow our real estate investing community. And yeah, just put out more content. I have an assistant working with us now, who's actually my sister, but she's very qualified. So she's been helping me out a lot, helping me to stay organized, and things have really done well this year due to her involvement. So yeah, I think it's just the beginning. Hopefully eventually, once things subside, I can get it on the road and, maybe do some day in the life with past guests in their local markets. But we'll see, man. But I think, the future's bright for the podcast.
Oh yeah, without a question, man. It's definitely bright. You definitely moving in the right direction. What's your sister's name? Shout out to your sister for coming
Pamela.
on board. Pamela, shout out Pamela for coming on board and organizing everything. Shout out to your parents too, man. Anytime we check in, I'm always asking you how they're doing, yo. And so
Appreciate it.
yeah, man, you have lofty goals for the future, but definitely doable. I don't think that you'll fall short of any of the things that you aspire for, Sam. The question is always like, is it meant for us, right? Like, with you applying to graduate school, that wasn't where you were supposed to be at that time, but you are where you are where you're supposed to be, man. And you seeing you smile is a beautiful thing, because I know how much, difficulty you had, and some of the turmoil in regards to like trying to really align yourself more purposefully with your mission in life. And it seems like if you aren't there, man, you are really, really close, my brother. So that's a beautiful thing. And so, Sam, as we continue to connect here on the podcast, I would love to know, what's your motivation, right? And so you've done so much work. You're well on your way to having an awesome retirement, I'm sure, probably much younger than you had even anticipated. But what keeps you going, man? You mentioned all the difficulties. You mentioned, this just hasn't been easy, yet you keep pushing forward. So talk to us, man. Why is that?
Yeah. So, I've always been like a very futuristic person, very big imagination, very hopeful person. So, I truly believe that this is just the beginning. And, I have more people to impact. I have more people to serve. I have more people's stories to put out there. Every person I interview, some of them, the ones that really mean a lot to me are those it's their first podcast, and they have amazing stories. And for me, these people think these stories are not out there. They are. They're just not being told. So that's my motivation. Just telling stories that are not being told. And I say my family too, my current and future family is a motivation. And I just want to serve people. I just want to help people. So that is really those are really some of the motivating factors that keep me going every day. Keep me going when I don't feel like doing show notes, when I don't feel like uploading stuff, when I don't feel like making content. And you have your days sometimes, but what keeps me pushing through is just knowing that there's a great mission here. There's a big purpose here, and I just got to keep going and seeing it through.
You're listening to the Third Lap Podcast with Mal Davis.
Yeah, Sam, and I want to give you some appreciation today because you also were one of the underlying factors for me starting this. When right before you had started George, I think I had talked to you a little bit about my plan to do one. You was like, yo, that sounds dope. I'm doing one too. Started George, kicked it off. It's been running and I'm still twiddling my thumbs. Like, yo, you know what, man? I think I listened to the first episode of your podcast a while ago and I'm sitting there listening to it and I'm like, yo, Malcolm, just do it, man. You sitting here like Sam's killing the game. And so I want to thank you, bro, because you still checked in with me. It's like, yo, where are you in that process? Like, what's going on with that, Mal? And so, yeah, I want to thank you, brother. You were one of the select few people that kept on me about getting this done. And so, when I was drafting up my list of people I wanted to talk to, you were at the top. It took us a little bit of time because you're a busy brother, man. I appreciate you. But, I'm just so grateful to have you here and for us to continue to be able to share these moments as we both grow and strive to do different things. To be able to realign like this, was important for me. And so again, I can't thank you enough for that motivation. I also can't thank you enough for joining me today, man. And just talking to us about your story. And so, you talked to us about where you from, Brooklyn, you know what I mean? Shout out to
Brooklyn,
the
house
DK.
Without a doubt, man.
Yes, sir. So you talked to us about living in New York, about LA, about getting your start in real estate and buying that first property in Ohio, some of the difficulties of work and balancing properties and figuring out what to do next. You've talked to us about where you see yourself headed with your properties and with your podcast. You've talked to us about your motivation, your need to serve and your need to continue to inform people of what's out there in the world, which is amazing. And so, as we get to the tail end of the podcast here, this is the motivational thoughts for the people. So this is 2 to 3 minutes of just Sam spitting straight facts, right? And so what do you want people to walk away with understanding about you and your message? And what are you challenging folks to go out into the world and do next?
Stop trying to be perfect. When I started my podcast, when I started the Instagram page, I was largely off of social media for a couple of years, maybe 3 years. It's very seldomly on social media. So I had to learn how to use Instagram again. The first content I put out was terrible because I didn't know what I was doing. The audio quality of my podcast in the beginning was horrible. I have a producer now. But what I'm saying is, I say all that to say, you have to believe you can learn anything, right? I've educated myself. I bought courses, books to learn about social media, to learn about different things. And you have to believe you can learn anything and you have to just get better as you go. A lot of people stay on the sidelines for whatever they want to do in life because they have analysis paralysis. And this is not just for real estate. This is if you want to write a book, if you want to start a business, whatever it is you want to do, if you want to apply for a job, if you want to go to school. A lot of people they have analysis paralysis. They just sit and just keep trying to perfect before launching and going out. Now I understand there's some degree of planning that needs to take place, but there's something called a minimal viable product. The minimal viable product is what is good enough to go out essentially. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's good enough to actually put out to people, get some feedback, and just continue to get better and refine. So I want people to really walk away with this knowing that you can get better as you go. You don't need to have all the money. You don't need to have all the resources. You don't need to have all the contacts. What you need to do is start and you will find the right people. People will notice what you're doing and you just got to keep going. So that's what I would say. And then I would say, just keep going, every part of my journey wasn't all great. and it's not all great all the time, but the purpose has to keep you going. You know, you'll go up and down in how you feel and how things go, but you got to keep going. You just like you're one run away from things taking off. You got to always believe that, you know? So those are some of my words that I would say.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And my wife and I talk all the time, and I say, you know, no one that ever quit makes it, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
quit, you stop right in that place, right? Like you think about a person walking, all right, well, when you quit, you stop right there. And you think about how many people that you've made it past that are just stuck in that place, right? Fear of next steps. And you mentioned analysis paralysis. Like that's something that stopped me from getting into stocks, that stopped me from investing so far, that was stopping me from a podcast, you know, because I wanted to research. I had to know everything. And before I get into it, I got to be an expert. And then I'm like, nah, yo, you got to do stuff, right? Like so much expertise comes from doing, you know, like you said, minimum viable product. Like, is this something serviceable? Is this something that people are interested in? And then you workshopping, right? You know, I had a Zane Johnson, who was a lawyer. We had a consultation and he walked me through a couple of things that I need to focus on. And like what he mentioned was so helpful, gaining information from the demographic that I'm trying to have this podcast appeal to. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Like maybe that's not the demographic. And if it is, I need to figure that out so I can cater the message and cater the marketing better to the folks that are really digesting this. And so, you know, Sam, I really appreciate all of the feedback and guidance that you've provided. Everything is just, it's been jewels on top of jewels, man. I'm excited to have people check out your podcast and learn more about investment and Black folks. Let's get into this game, man. You know, we're getting left behind. There's so many ways. And just looking at some of the episodes that you have folks talking about like how to transform or build transformational wealth with their families, you know, all the things, how to use real estate to retire before 40, like all the things that we talk about, all the things that we're all interested in. Sam is actively going over this stuff on his podcast. And so definitely tune in and check him out. And so Sam, we're now here at the reading portion. So are there books that you've read? You mentioned some courses that you've purchased. What are some things that bring you joy or you suggest people check out to learn more about real estate or really anything that you're interested in?
Yeah. So one book I would recommend is Black Fortunes. So it's called Black Fortunes, the story of, I think, 6 African Americans who became millionaires after slavery. You heard that right. So it's a story of 6 African Americans who pretty much directly after slavery were very prosperous. So it talks through their stories. You know, Annie Malone, Mando C.J. Walker, I believe there are 2 of them that are in there, but there are other lesser known people as well. So it talks about their stories. And my biggest takeaway for that is, you know, I understand, like, right, we go through things in life. Bad things happen, right? Bad things happen to good people too. But I would say, you know, there's always hope. You got to always believe the other side is going to be better. And when I read that book, I'm like, yo, nothing's impossible. If they could do it, you talking about like the early 1900s, man. What people in this country were facing, what our people in this country were facing, and they still managed to succeed. You know, they didn't always necessarily have a happy ending, but the fact that they even got to certain levels back then, a lot is possible now. A lot is still possible now. So that's one book I recommend. The next I recommend is Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice. I believe it's by Dennis Kimbrough. Really good book about just different African Americans who have succeeded in various things, various fields, various occupations or business ventures, whatever the case is. And I think it's just an inspiration. You know, for me, I always try to focus on, in the midst of everything that's going on, I always try to focus on, you know, what's possible, what other people have done who look like me, to show that it's possible. You know, just to keep myself encouraged, keep myself lifted. So those are 2 books I recommend, and I probably should go back and read them again.
Awesome, my brother. Appreciate you. And so where can folks find you on social media if they want to reach out to you? Where can people find out more information about your real estate investment?
Yeah, so all the information can be found at blackrealestatedialogue.com. And then as far as Instagram, you can find me at blackrealestate.com as well. Twitter, if you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter sometimes at Bread Podcast, BRED Podcast. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Perfect, bro. And so we're at the end, man. I appreciate you. We made it to the end. Any last words you want to share with the folks?
Just thank you, man. Thank you for inviting me on your platform. I'm proud of everything you're doing. So I really, really do appreciate it. And then for everybody else, just stay encouraged. Check the podcast out. Continue to follow Mal and what he's doing, and make sure you subscribe if you listen to this podcast. It's very important. And so, yeah, thank you for this opportunity. If I could be of assistance to anybody, just let me know.
Yeah, for sure, man. Reach out to Sam, connect with him. Definitely check out his website. If you're listening to the Third Lap, please subscribe. Please review the podcast. Always appreciate it. You have now listened to another episode of the Third Lap podcast. Really appreciate your time today, Sam. This is, again, Mal Davis here. Each one, teach one. We all learn together. Thanks again. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Third Lap podcast. This is your host, Mal Davis. Please visit thethirdlappodcast.com for more information about the podcast, about our guests, and also to see our reading list. You can find us at The Third Lap Podcast on LinkedIn and Facebook, at Third Lap on Twitter, and at third_lap_podcast on Instagram. If you know anyone that would be great to be featured on this show, please reach out to our host, Mal Davis. He's always looking for interesting people to learn more about them and to talk about their pathway. Thank you so much again. Have a good one.